Welcome to Live Interactive English. I'm Kim. Today's article is called A Brief History of Quarantine, and this is part 1. Now, I'm sure the word quarantine needs no explanation. For the past year and some, we have spent a lot of time talking about quarantine, hearing about quarantine. Maybe you know somebody who went through quarantine. It has become a pretty usual word in this day and age, and that's when you're talking about disease, there's inevitably going to be something about quarantine. We'll find out about the history of it in this part. But just think for a second. Quarantine is really an effective thing, even though it's really not fun that you have to spend a week or 2 weeks or maybe even longer away from other people. It is an effective way to stop the spread of a disease. Now you can think about what would you do during quarantine. Luckily, I haven't been in one yet. I haven't traveled or had any contact with somebody who was infected with COVID. But I always thought about what would I do if I were in quarantine? And I think the answer is video games and eating. And reading, but mostly eating. So think about what you would do in quarantine before we get to our article here, The Brief History of Quarantine.
How do you stop a disease from spreading? An effective method is through quarantine, the act of separating a possibly infected person from everyone else for a period of time. Most recently, quarantine was widely used to help stop the spread of COVID-19. However, this method has existed for thousands of years. The practice goes all the way back to biblical times. In fact, the Bible contains several references to keeping lepers away from the rest of society. Similarly, when the Black Death began spreading across Europe in 1346, many disease carriers were taken outside the cities and left to either recover or die.
Okay, the history of quarantine, and our article opens, how do you stop a disease from spreading? Isn't that the number one question when you have a disease that can go from people to people or animals among animals, as mad cow disease was many years ago? How do you stop a disease from spreading? This is the question that scientists are always trying to answer. Now, spread is to go out from the original source. So you can picture it kind of like this, like spreading out among people or among things. It's when something starts from an origin point or an original source and it just goes out. And spread doesn't just have to be disease. If a video is really popular on YouTube and you share it with all your friends, it has spread. And this is where we get viral from. Diseases spread like viruses, and also things on the internet spread like viruses and become viral. So this spreading and viral virus terminology are all related to something going out into the population. For example, insects can spread a number of diseases. Yeah, insects are just one of the many ways we can get disease, and the one that comes to mind the most is malaria, which comes from mosquitoes. This is a disease that comes from the South Tropics area, a lot in Asia, a lot in South America, and mosquitoes are the number one spreader of that disease. Well, our article continues, an effective method is through quarantine, the act of separating a possibly infected person from everyone else for a period of time. Most recently, quarantine was widely used to help stop the spread of COVID-19. However, this method has existed for thousands of years. Yeah, so of course, as we said, we all know this word quarantine. It's in the news all the time because this is how people separate each other in order to keep infected people or possibly infected people away from others. And most recently, it has really been used a lot in COVID-19. In fact, the practice goes all the way back to biblical times. In fact, the Bible contains several references to keeping lepers away from the rest of society. So quarantine is not just a recent thing, it has existed for thousands of years, and you can even talk about it existing in biblical times. That refers to anything written in the Bible. and the Bible itself has references within it to keeping lepers away from the rest of society. Lepers were people who had leprosy, which is a disease that spread very easily and caused a lot of wounds on people's skin, and it was very contagious. It was easy to get it and easy to spread it to other people. So people didn't want these lepers near them. They wanted them away so that they could contain the disease. In this case, to contain something means to keep it in one area. People that may be infected with a disease are contained in quarantine hotels or hospitals or in a certain area to keep them away from others. But contain can also mean that just something is inside something else. For example, the book contains hundreds of jokes. So you're not trying to keep the jokes away from the book, they're inside the book. So contains can also mean inside something. For example, my cup contains coffee. Just pretend I have a coffee here. And there's coffee inside of the cup. As our article continues, similarly, when the Black Death began spreading across Europe in 1346, many disease carriers were taken outside the cities and left to either recover or die. This was a very famous event in Europe, and it began in 1346 called the Black Death or the Plague, and this was when rats brought a disease to Europe on ships, and it spread very, very quickly among the population. So the people that had this were taken outside of the cities, away from people who weren't infected, and unfortunately they were left outside there to either get better or to die. And the Black Plague was called the Black Plague, the Black Death, because it actually was very deadly and it killed a lot of people. So we've reached our break, and afterward we will find out even more about the history of quarantine. So join me next.
Hello， 大家好，我是 Hanny。新冠疫情期间，大家对隔离这个词再熟悉不过了。Quarantine， 它当名词就可以指隔离检疫，当动词就可以表达对什么来进行隔离检疫。我们可以用 in quarantine 来表达在进行隔离检疫的意思。好，那补充一下哦，还有像防疫旅馆，我们英文可以说 quarantine hotel。而大家都知道，要阻止疾病传播，其中一个有效方式就是隔离嘛。那这种做法其实可以追溯到圣经时代，圣经里面有好几次提到让麻风病人远离社会的其他人。同样的，黑死病在1346年开始在欧洲散播的时候，许多疾病带源者被带到城外自生自灭。好，我们来看一下单字 spread。spread 可以当动词或名词，表示传播、扩散或是蔓延。Kim 老师有提到 virus 病毒，它的形容词 viral viral 是形容病毒的。我们有一个用语叫做 go viral， 就是常常用来指音乐啊、影片或是文字，它透过社群网站等等的媒介大量转发，就好像病毒传播一样，迅速到无法控制，也就是在网络上疯传的意思。这时候老师还用到 terminology 这个字，就是 term 用语这个字后面加上 inology terminology 可以表达专门用语、术语的意思。再来看 contain， 它是指包含、含有、包括。这个字还有控制、阻止，像是阻止某个有害物蔓延扩散的那种语义。再来补充一些疾病的说法 ，leprosy。它是指汗生病，那这种病俗称为麻风病。那么文中的 leper 就是指汗生病患者，也就是一般说的麻风病患者。再来 malaria 这个字呢，它表示疟疾。而 Kim 老师他提到黑死病，我们也可以称为 the plague。那么 plague P-L-A-G-U-E， 它当一般名词就有瘟疫啊、灾难或是祸患的意思。老师还用到两个形容词可以学起来哦。Deadly 就是 dead 后面加上 ly 来形容致命的、致死的，还有 contagious C-O-N-T-A-G-I-O-U-S contagious 是形容接触传染的、具有传染力的。好，这个段落3个重点，我们进入文法时间。好，来看第一个重点是 go back to 加名词，是表达说可以追溯到某个时间点，那就跟 date back to 是意思一样的。例如 ，the tradition goes back to ancient times， 这个传统可以追溯到远古时代。 第二个重点是 leave somebody to 加上原形动词，是表达说任由某人去做某事而不帮忙不插手。那么被动用法就是 somebody be left to 加上原形动词，例如 He was left to clean up the mess by himself. 他只能自己一个人把脏乱打扫干净。大家彻夜狂欢完，全部闪人，放他一个人在那边打扫，好惨哦。好，再来看第三个重点是 either A or B， 或者是 either A or B， 就是表达不是 A 就是 B，A、B 的词性要相同哦。例如 He's either unwilling or unable to solve the problem. 他不是不愿意，就是没能力来解决那个问题。那我们接着回到课文中。
Soon after, quarantine became an official disease prevention measure. In 1348, the Italian trading port of Venice created a quarantine system for arriving ships. Any ships that had come from infected ports had to remain off Venice's coasts for a 40-day period. The 40-day period was called quarantino, since 40 in Italian is quaranta. These Italian expressions also form the root of the modern English word quarantine.
All right, we're back, and we were talking about the Black Plague, the Black Death. That's a very scary name for this disease that came through rats on ships, and it infected much of Europe, and it was really, really bad for the population. So as our article continues, soon after this plague, quarantine became an official disease prevention measure. So people had realized that they could stop the spread of this disease by taking people who were infected and removing them from the other people who weren't infected. This is a good way to make sure it doesn't spread. And this became official. Official is something that is recognized as being real or true by a government or by a large group of people. For example, Canada has 2 official languages. They're English and French. So the government and most of the people in Canada have recognized that English and French are the languages most used in Canada. So they have become official. So in this case, the way of quarantine caught the attention of whoever was in charge back then, and they decided to make this the thing that they're going to do. And they want to let the whole population follow this thing, follow this rule, and make quarantine an official way to prevent the spread of disease. So the article continues. In 1348, the Italian trading port of Venice created a quarantine system for arriving ships. Any ships that had come from infected ports had to remain off Venice's coast for a 40-day period. So these days, Venice is known as the floating city. You can take a boat that's run by the people that do this in the water, and they wear the hats and they got the striped shirts, and you can float through the canals in Venice. But back then in 1348, Venice was actually a really important trading port. So this is a place where ships from other places in the world would come in and drop off their stuff. And as I've said, these rats were coming in on the ships. They were staying in the ports, and the rats were coming off and infecting people. So this is a really bad thing for port cities. If you have ships coming in, you really need to be careful. So what did they do? They told them to stay away and remain off the coast for 40 days. If you remain somewhere, you stay there. So for example, Danny went to buy a coffee, but Zoe remained in the library. So Danny went out, but Zoe decided to stay there. These ships had to remain or to stay in the same place for 40 days, waiting to be let onto the shore and into the port. But they had to remain there because that was part of the quarantine procedure. So as we continue, the 40-day period was called quarantino, since 40 in Italian is quaranta. Okay, so 40 days turns into quaranta in Italian, which turns into quarantino. These Italian expressions also form the root of the modern English word quarantine. Yeah, we can see the Italian root of this word just through the 40 and quaranto connection there, and we end up with quarantine. English is really famous for this. When you are studying English, you will find so many words that came from French, Italian, Spanish, even some that came from Asian languages. Sushi is not an English word, really. It comes from Japanese. So we have a lot of words like this in English that have their roots in other languages. So if you ever have a hard time pronouncing something, just remember, it might not be from English, actually. English likes to steal other languages' words. So this is an expression. An expression is something like, it's raining cats and dogs. It's just a phrase or a saying that people use to convey an idea. So my dad often uses uncommon expressions. Maybe my dad has some kind of weird way of saying things that are special to him. Some families have that, where you have a family way of saying something or some words that make sense to your family but might not make sense to people outside your family. And these are expressions you can use within your family or your friend group that only you guys know them, and other people might think you're kind of weird. So that's the history so far of quarantine. It started out as a way to prevent disease, it became official, and now it's something we're even using in the modern day to prevent the spread of these diseases. So thank you for joining me. You'll find out more in part 2, and happy quarantine.
好，刚刚说黑死病呢，它是在1346年开始在欧洲散播的。那不久后，隔离就成了正式的疾病预防措施。像在1348年，意大利的威尼斯贸易港建立了一套检疫系统。那么，任何从感染港口来的船只都必须在威尼斯海岸附近停留40天。好，意大利这个40天的期限被称为 quarantino， 然后后来呢，就是这种相关的40的意大利文的词语，也构成了现代英文单字 quarantine 的字根了。我们最后来看3个单字 official。它是形容正式的或是官方的，这个字也可以当名词来指官员。再来 remain 当动词表示停留，留在某处，它也可以当连缀动词来表达保持啊，仍然是怎么样。再来 expression 它是指措辞、词语或是表达表情。好 ，Kim 老师刚刚用到 convey 这个动词 convey convey 就是传达的意思。好，那么以上是今天的讲解，同学别走开，马上回来哦。
How do you stop a disease from spreading? An effective method is through quarantine, the act of separating a possibly infected person from everyone else for a period of time. Most recently, quarantine was widely used to help stop the spread of COVID-19. However, this method has existed for thousands of years. The practice goes all the way back to biblical times. In fact, the Bible contains several references to keeping lepers away from the rest of society. Similarly, when the Black Death began spreading across Europe in 1346, many disease carriers were taken outside the cities and left to either recover or die. Soon after, quarantine became an official disease prevention measure. In 1348, the Italian trading port of Venice created a quarantine system for arriving ships. Any ships that had come from infected ports had to remain off Venice's coasts for a 40-day period. The 40-day period was called quarantino, since 40 in Italian is quaranta. These Italian expressions also form the root of the modern English word quarantine.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephen.
And I'm Jen.
We're going to play a game called Guess the Bear, where each of us has 3 words or phrases on three cards. With each of these words or phrases, I'm going to read 2 sentences, and instead of saying that word, I'm going to say bear, and you have to guess what it is.
All right.
All right, so 1 minute to guess 3 of these. Ready?
All right.
Go. All right, first one, this is a verb.
Okay.
Number 1, when I'm sick, I try to bear in bed to rest. Number 2, the Miranda right starts with you have the right to bear silent.
I should know this.
You should know it.
Say that again.
The Miranda right.
Remain.
Okay, good. You got it. Okay, this is a noun, one word. The first sentence. There is an bear. Easy come, easy go. Number 2. The boy had a silly bear on his face.
Grin, face. Pass.
Pass. Okay, this is a phrase, 3 words. Number 1. They will bear Japan for their anniversary. Number 2, he doesn't want to bear school. They will bear Japan for their anniversary. Number 2, he doesn't want to bear school. It was close. It's they will go back to Japan for their anniversary. That's hard. But the second one, he doesn't want to go back to school, which is probably how everyone feels.
Yes.
All right, and the other one, this was kind of hard. There is an expression, easy come, easy go. The boy had a silly expression on his face. You said grin, which is a type of expression.
Yeah,
so
it is.
You were close, yeah.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, let's go.
Go.
All right, first word, verb. Not washing your hands can bear disease. Don't bear rumors about other people.
Spread.
All right, verb. Does this dish bear peanuts? The box bared old family photos.
Contain.
Okay, adjective. Mom received a bare letter from the government. Taiwan is the bare name of Taiwan. Mom received a bare letter from the government.
Official.
Yay!
Yes! Mine were a lot easier than yours.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
I really
You
do
have to
this.
admit that, right?
See you next time.